welcome to the last session of today, and I'd like to introduce the moderator for session, Mr. Lucian Niemeyer, the CEO of Building Cybersecurity. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Lucian, and I just want to congratulate you. I've been coming in and out on the last 2 days. You've had an incredible array of speakers, and I'm just hoping that this action-packed hour and a half to finish your webinar will be worth it for our audience. I think it is. And we've got a wide range of expertise from private sector to government, but I think it's a great way to end what I think has been 2 days of really good content. So congratulations to you and Carolina for putting this together, and we're proud to be batting cleanup here. So for the audience members that are joining us, we have over the next hour and a half, we're hoping you go ahead on the East Coast, break open a lunch. But we have, believe it or not, I think we're up to 9 or 10 speakers that really will cover 3 distinct subjects. So we've broken them down to about a half-hour increments. So the first panel, who I'll introduce here in a minute, will look at the overall OT threat from a unique perspective, and that's coming from the government side, and also the private sector. And then we will spend the middle 30 minutes talking about what has been developed as far as a OT cyber framework and how it can be applied in just about any application eventually. Right now, we're concentrating on commercial real estate, and then by far, an amazing panel. The last 30 minutes is going to be a discussion about risk, insurance risk, and where that ultimately might affect investments in cybersecurity. So I'm hoping everybody will see how we're moving fast to the next 90 minutes. Hopefully, it's worth it to you all, and particularly in the fact that we've got an incredible range of expertise that's on the call. So what I'd like to do is I would like to point out that we'll be taking questions online Q&A. I will, because we have so many folks to get to, I'll be screening those questions along with my co-host, E.J. von Schomburg, who will introduce himself in the second panel. By way of introduction of myself, I am Lucian Niemeyer. I am the CEO of a nonprofit entity called Building Cybersecurity that was established a couple of years ago, specifically to get after and offer a comprehensive framework that can be used in any sector that would be easy to look at levels of cybersecurity for specifically directed to the operational technologies. So if you would like to find out more information about the nonprofit, I will post in the chat in the Q&A contact information. But right now, I want to get to the overall theme of our first panel, which is looking at operational threats. And the overall lead for this, or the overall title for this webinar, is incentivizing investments in national safety. And that's really what we see as the OT threat, is as much of a matter of cybersecurity, but more importantly, cyber safety. And exactly what we see in our nonprofit and what we'll talk about today is the emerging OT threat that it can then be a physical threat to either people or property. So I would like, without any further ado, to introduce our first panel. I'm going to go ahead and just give their names, and then they'll pick up a little bit on opening comments. First of all, it's very rare that we get somebody from the fort to come out behind the fort and talk publicly. So I'm thrilled to be able to offer to the webinar today the expertise of Michael Dranesfield. He works in the Control Systems Cybersecurity branch of the Cybersecurity Directorate for the National Security Agency. And the public servants that we have working at the fort every day on our nation's security, particularly when it comes to critical infrastructure, cannot be underestimated. The value they bring to the safety and prosperity of our nation, and it's a joy and an honor to have Michael join us and be able to talk to us a little bit about the threats he sees. Next up, we'll also have another esteemed government employee, Daryl Hagley, who I've had the pleasure of working with for years. He is currently serving within the Air Force Directorate as an Air Force Technical Director for Control Systems Cyber Resiliency. So Daryl, it's a pleasure to be able to share the stage with you once again and talk a little bit about, from your perspective, what are you seeing on the cyber threat. And also, I'd like to introduce Debbie Gordon, who is the founder and CEO of Cloud Range, and who has developed one of the nation's most advanced cyber ranges for training and simulations. So we have a really good first half hour. It's going to be moving pretty quickly. But Michael, I'd like to turn it over to you for any opening comments, and then we'll follow up with Daryl and then Debbie.
Sure. So, Lucian, thank you very much. You wanted to know a little bit more about myself, and so I came to the agency over 30 years ago as someone who studied mathematics in college and wasn't quite sure how to apply that if I wasn't going to be a teacher. And NSA gave me an opportunity to use my mathematics skills in understanding cryptography and analysis. I went back to school and studied computer engineering a few years later. And so I have that as my background. I began looking into and studying critical infrastructure, automated systems about 10 to 12 years ago. And so that's my current role of understanding automated control systems and how they're used, especially within the authorities that we have in supporting national security systems and supporting the missions that rely on those systems. And then, working with my counterparts like Daryl and others at DHS, CISA, DOE, as we work on broader problems within the government and outside of the government. So thanks for inviting me today. We had talked about a video that was produced a few years ago, which was very humorous. It was a video of a young girl who had gained access to a manufacturing facility. Her name was Suki. And the video showed that she had taken control of that painting process and had painted her name on the side of an automobile. And that was very humorous, but it highlighted the need for controlling who had access to our critical systems. And in this example was a manufacturing facility. And so we know that in the Suki commercial, she had humorous intent, right? But we know of numerous examples that have occurred over the last 10 years that weren't as humorous. And I want to highlight just a couple. First one I'll highlight is in 2014, the German steel mill attack. I think most people on the line are familiar with that and the destruction that was caused there. 2015 and 16, we had the power grid incidents in the Ukraine where they lost power for a period of time. And the tools that were developed and tested there within their grid, we see being used elsewhere. 2017 was, if you remember, the Saudi Aramco petrochemical facility. And so the safety instrumentation system that was knocked offline. And as analysis occurred, it was discovered that there were critical devices that had updated implanted firmware that for whatever reason, the attack was not executed. But it was a highlight to the community and a warning to the community that these types of systems, while they were designed to never be connected to the control system, they were there purely for safety purposes. In this case, that facility had been connected directly to the control system, which was directly connected to the internet. Fast forward up to Florida, you have the Oldsmar water treatment facility that was accessed in an unauthorized access. Fortunately, no destruction or disruption occurred there. I think we're all familiar with the Colonial Pipeline ransomware incident from last year that had a tremendous impact on the civilian population. And it really was a wake-up call for helping the community, both within the government and outside the government, understand what are critical systems and what are maybe not so critical systems. And the government has a definition of what is critical, mission critical, and I alluded to what we call national security systems earlier. But for Colonial Pipeline, it was viewed that the system that was ransomed wasn't critical. And maybe by some definitions, it wasn't critical, but by the company's perspective, there were critical functions running on that system. And so it's caused all of us to take a look at how we view certain systems and classified certain systems as critical and non-critical. The last incident I'll talk about it occurred earlier this year when it was a run-up to the war in Ukraine, where you had multiple VSAT systems that were taken offline. And so you had a communications infrastructure that was relied upon that was taken out in that location. So that gives you a few ideas of, or a summary of some of the incidents that have occurred over the last 10 years. What I'd like to highlight is in May of last year, within the United States, President Biden signed an executive order of 14028, which was focused on improving the nation's cybersecurity. I want to read to you just a couple of lines from that executive order. In section 1, it stated that the incremental, under the policy focus, incremental improvements will not give us the security we need. Instead, the federal government needs to make bold changes and significant investments in order to defend the vital institutions that underpin the American way of life. Federal government must bring to bear the full scope of its authorities and resources to protect and secure its computer systems, whether they are cloud-based, on-premise, or hybrid. The scope of protection and security must include systems that process data, the IT, and those that run our vital machinery that ensure our safety, the OT. And so the section that followed the policy section was titled Removing Barriers to Sharing Threat Information. And that ties us into what we're talking about today. So the US government has various ways of sharing threat information in a downgraded, unclassified way with the community. NSA has on our website, you can go and you can look at some of the cybersecurity advisories that we produce, which are intended to communicate to the community what we believe are important actions to be taken to whether to mitigate or to understand activities within the adversary space. A few examples I'll highlight. From April this past year, NSA issued a joint cybersecurity advisory on the Russian state-sponsored and criminal cyber threats to critical infrastructure that could impact organizations both within and beyond the Ukraine. This was very groundbreaking because it was a CSA that was produced in partnership with not only with NSA, but with CISA, FBI, and then the Australian, Canadian, New Zealand, and UK governments, along with through our joint cyber defense collaborative with a number of our industrial partners. So it was a CSA that was produced in conjunction and collaboration with a number of partners for the community and the user community to be aware of. Other CSAs that we produced over the last couple of years, one focused on advanced persistent threat cyber tools that were discovered and were targeting ICS-gated devices. We produced one dually with CISA recently, which was titled a Control System Defense, Know Your Opponent. And so this ties into the MITRE ATT&CK framework. If the community is aware of those types of frameworks, it's understanding how an adversary focuses on attacking your system, understanding what their goals are, gaining access, developing tools, reconnaissance, attacking systems. So that's a very good CSA. I would recommend that. Finally, in October this year, just recently, there was a CSA that was developed focusing on the top CVEs that were actively exploited by the People's Republic of China, and it focused on attacks going all the way back to 2020. So a couple other CSAs that exist, you can find them on the websites. But in general, the point is that we've published a number of these guidance, and they're to communicate to the community, trying to translate from an intelligence and from a threat point of view into actionability for the community to take for securing their systems. So concluding mark I would make is that so the cyber threat landscape is serious and growing each day. The increased use of IIoT technology within manufacturing and other critical infrastructures offers adversaries additional cyber paths into critical systems, exposing them to possible destructive and disruptive impacts to our critical processes. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries, appreciate it. And I've got a ton of questions on that, Michael, but I would like to get Daryl's perspective. So Daryl, you have a unique history and unprecedented background. At one point being the principal cyber in the office of the principal cyber advisor for Department of Defense before your current role within the Air Force. How are you looking and responding to some of the things that Michael talked about, and any other comments you'd like to make as far as opening up?
Sure. Thank you very much. And this is another great opportunity. Anytime we can share, our perspective, really appreciate that. We are seeing just an incredible uptick in adversary activity in this space, about 2,000% since 2019 every year in the OT space. And when the Director of National Intelligence publishes an unclassified report in February of 2021 and says Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are actively pursuing, targeting, getting access to OT networks, to all networks, not just fuel systems or pipelines or airfields, but also inside facilities, because HVAC systems support the mission. those, it's pretty serious. And, we've seen unclassified reports for years. Now it's just so prevalent, it needs to be at the unclassified level. And as Michael said, these reports are coming out. But one of the challenges is making sure that the people, the system owners and operators who run these systems are getting those reports and know what to do. As you're aware, a lot of folks don't have, are not read into classified programs, so sometimes they won't see the classified justification, but that's not needed. Just what's really needed is to act. We continue to find as we go from base to base, as you'll hear senior leaders recognize that our installations are power projection platforms. We can't launch missiles or aircraft without guiding them, without maintaining them, and things like that. And all those go a lot to are based on these OT networks. One of the things I like to emphasize is the DoD Strategic Management Plan from FY 22 to 26. The DepSecDef says, quote, the department must adopt the cyber first, cyber always mindset and be prepared to defend DoD systems in a contested cyberspace. That's new, as a lot of commanders are still trying to figure out where cyber fits. So what I'm very happy about is in this new position, it's the first position for a senior leader across the department to focus on control system cyber resiliency. And so right now for the Air Force and Space Force to look at those specific systems that support those missions. So just three things that I'd like to emphasize that we have seen that we really want to see get greater emphasis is to really understand the systems that are in your inventory and are connected and are supporting your most critical asset, your proprietary information. Understand that that topology and your inventory, right? And then next is what is connected to what? Is it a standalone thing to where someone takes a CD and moves it, or is it connected to a vendor? Understand who has what permissions for that. And then, conduct regular rehearsals of if you have a cyber attack or think that there could be a cyber exploit, run through a rehearsal of who does what when. And I think that would be a couple of the best practices to kind of get ahead of all the threats that we're seeing in the space. Back to you.
No worries, Daryl. And that is like the perfect lead in to our third panelist. And that's Debbie Gordon, who has actually worked on and developing the types of ranges we need to do rehearsals, to do training, to do simulations. So I do want to give Debbie a chance to introduce herself. She's got a legacy of starting up and running cyber related companies, and just thrilled to have your private sector expertise on what you would like to, what you're seeing in the space right now, and what you think is needed for that training and simulation, and any of the other opening comments you'd like to make, Debbie.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. And Michael and Daryl, thanks for your intros too, because I'm going to relate a few things back to those. So my career actually started in the mid 90s in the technical education space. So as many people in the OT and IT cybersecurity space come to it from the technology perspective, I live and breathe the organizational perspective and the human perspective on it. And of course, I understand technology, we build it, but it's how humans have to work on it. We all know about the cyber skills shortage, and that is just exponentially worse when it comes to OT. And so we developed training ranges for the purpose of preparing cyber defenders, both on the OT and the IT side, to detect and respond to attacks. And something that Daryl said about rehearsals, you said understand your systems and connections, and then make sure you're doing rehearsals. And also knowing what to do. A lot of people don't even know what they're looking at. And so awareness, and I'm not talking general cybersecurity awareness, but especially in converging environments between IT and OT, people don't even know what they're looking for. And so we've seen a lot of success with our building training ranges for people to get exposure to what they need to know, what's out there. We use the MITRE ATT&CK framework heavily, as well as the existing pieces of the NICE framework as it pertains to OT, although that's still a work in progress, to make sure that people have the understanding and continued ability to not only know what to do, but what to look for, what to do, when to do it, why to do it, and how to do it, and be able to measure progress from that perspective as well. And there's so much to do. You know, I always refer to the you know, regular old school IT data attacks as old fashioned, because OT is just a whole other level. And then the other thing when it comes to, you know, the organizational and human challenges, the people are the weakest link in the chain in any type of cyber threat. It's as much as AI and technology can help, and checking the boxes on processes and compliance is important. People are the last line of defense. So we have to be able to measure measure their skill levels, measure their competencies using standardized and accepted frameworks to be able to understand what the deltas are and how to actually prescribe the ways to true that up so we can reduce risk. And that's obviously a work in progress. That's why we're all here.
Yep. Wanted to offer the other panelists any chance to follow up on what each other said. If not, yeah, we have about 8 minutes left, so I'd like to hit a couple of questions real quick, and we've got some questions coming in from the Q&A. Very much appreciate that. So I think, Michael, you laid out pretty clearly where we're at right now with current trends. You gave a good history, and are you concerned about anything that has not happened in the past that you see as a potential emerging in the OT area? I mean, we know exactly where we've had traditional methods of attack, but looking forward, what should the industry, both public sector and private sector, be focusing in on as far as emerging OT threats?
Well, so thanks, Lucian. So from a government's point of view, you know, our focus is on critical missions that support, you know, our way of life. And so when you look at those critical missions, you look at how operational technology, how critical infrastructure support those missions. And so what we saw in, you know, over in Europe with Ukraine, and I mentioned the VSAT attack earlier. So cyber is a means, and so my concern is that adversaries now, there's a sort of precedents that have been set that this asymmetric approach to supporting symmetric warfare is out there. It's known now, and it's an area that will continue to be pursued. And so my concern is, as tensions rise in various parts of, I would say, the world, the infrastructures that exist supporting critical locations, facilities, and certain missions within those AORs. My concern is that those are ripe for adversary access and degradation of the missions that are critical to support the larger picture in those AORs. So that's the trend that I see, that the intent, adversaries have always had intent, but are they willing to use the cyber means to support their bigger desires? And my concern is that the adversaries are pursuing that now, and they'll continue to be more brazen in the way that they use cyber means to support their bigger objectives.
So yeah, Lucian, if I could jump in there, you know,
Perfect.
just not having tools in place to understand an adversary or somebody is even on your network. You know, that's one of the biggest things I'm concerned about, and we're going to see more of, you know, bots just getting on these networks and enabling access. Another thing is, you know, we're seeing this just incredible upward trend in ransomware, and it's, you know, been prevalent in the medical field, and, you know, that leads to safety issues. I think we're going to see more of that in the manufacturing and some of these other critical fields, to where you've really got to stay on top of that, because folks, you know, lives are at stake with some of this. The other thing is the negligent insider, the folks that don't even realize that they don't have enough security in place and kind of allowing access that they shouldn't be, and we don't have processes and procedures to minimize that. And then lastly, I think unknown actors like Anonymous all of a sudden just jumping in the game. And, you know, what if they say, well, I don't like, you know, natural gas as a solution anymore, and all of a sudden they're all against that. or one thing. So I think those are a number of different concerns that I have in the future in OT. Over.
Yeah. And Debbie, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think it's just a lack of understanding. There's just not enough resources. And so I commend everyone here for what they do, because organizations don't, I mean, we work a lot in the commercial sector, and it's to say the least scary seeing how some of these organizations they're not cohesive. They don't have a plan, and they know they don't have a plan, but they also don't know how to get a plan together. And so I think everyone is craving new frameworks, craving specific types of change management also with OT cyber, because there's just so much unknown there. So, the specific types of threats aside, we have to look at what how organizations are structured and how they're handling everything, because it's kind of messy right now. Yep.
Hey, what I'm gonna do, so we got a few minutes left before I turn it over to the second panel on EJ. But I got a couple of great questions in the Q&A. I'm going to try to combine them a little bit. So as we're looking forward and we're looking currently, what would you say are the most vulnerable for OT space vectors of attack, or the most prevalent ones? And then ultimately, what you think? I mean, there's specifically a question about segmentation. Is the best way to do is to segment your networks, or does that create potentially more risk because now you have more networks you have to monitor? So maybe if I could combine those questions and just pose it to the entire group, is that what is the biggest threat, and ultimately is segmentation the better way to go? Is there other mechanisms we can do to ultimately monitor, detect, and respond? I'll start with Daryl or whoever would like to.
Yeah, so we recommend segmentation so that if something happens, you can control it and kind of narrow it and quarantine it. So that's built into our now zero trust way of handling business there. And so I think segmentation will continue to be a preferred way rather than just completely allowing access across. Again, there hasn't been one trend in what's the most common, other than just right now a lot of it is using the exploits that are already known. That when folks haven't even done the updates, people are just taking advantage of it. So that's kind of where I've seen the trend is there's not any one new avenue of approach. It's still using all the same open source tools to access those.
So one thing you said, Michael, I want to foot stomp. A lot of those exploits are known and they're recorded and are available on websites for anybody in the private sector, not just critical infrastructure. You can go on the CISO website and look at where we've had OT attacks, and they lay them out and they offer remedies. Is that true, Michael? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
that's true. So the question is, how does an adversary gain access to use that or exploit that known CVE? And so, this 2-day seminar conference is focused on the industrial Internet of Things. And so while the IoT explosion is supporting increased functionality and production, it's also opening up a huge number of access vectors into critical manufacturing and other OT systems. And so I think on the screen I'm seeing the Suki commercial, which is interesting. It sort of concludes our part of the seminar, but it's yeah.
So before I turn it over to EJ, I just need a final big thought that you can leave with the audience, particularly moving forward, and that would want them either to get a hold of you or to just walk away and say, okay, I got to write that one down. I'm going to put Daryl on the spot. If you had one thing you wanted to leave with the audience before we move on to the next session.
I think we've got to be able to rehearse what our actions are. Even if we don't know everything, at least we can understand what and who is supposed to do what when. I think that is the biggest thing we can do. It's almost like if there's a fire, we know what to do, who to call. If there's a cyber incident, we need to understand that first, and then that'll put us in a good position for ransomware or these other things.
Yeah, okay, that's too easy of a tee up for Debbie. So I'm going to go to Michael next for the big thought, and then Debbie, you'll bring us home.
Yeah. So my one thing I would promote is partnerships. The government can't succeed without our industry partners. And I would argue that our industry partners, and this is where the executive order focused, was sharing what we know about adversarial activity, focusing on whether it's in our manufacturing systems or other parts of our critical infrastructure, and really the area of safety. Safety is a huge concern. And so the one area I would say is needed is continuing growing partnerships to address this problem.
Yeah, we're going to talk safety, the next panel. That's fantastic. And then Debbie, bring us home for just a final thought before we turn it over to EJ.
Yeah, so it's really just awareness, preparation, and organizational alignment, aligning disparities in goals between IT and OT, first and foremost, before any technology or processes are established, and training programs, very proactive and ongoing. This isn't a one-time thing, and it's changing every day.
All right, so I really do appreciate everyone's expertise and opinions on this first panel. EJ, I don't know if you're on the line, but I'm going to tee you up. We're gonna go video off, and then like to quickly transition into the panel. Feel free for those who are on this one to stay on. Don't ask hard questions to stump another panels, but at least stay on and listen in. So EJ, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. In my 30+ career, it's the first time I've been on a call with two Lucians. So, so my name is EJ von Schomburg. For my day job, I'm the vice president of a partner alliance for a company called Red Bison, and we design and build managed networks for commercial real estate owners, and then add the smart technology that goes on it. And I've been a founding member of our Building Cybersecurity nonprofit, which has now been a 3-year journey. To tell you the initial story, we were presenting as part of a group CBRE for smart connected bases, and lo and behold, the assistant secretary walks into the room, sits down with his entourage, and just grills us on how are you going to protect these OT assets? And there really wasn't an answer. And out of that came this, common mission of us trying to look not only at the public sector, but the real role of BCS, or building cybersecurity, is, today we have over $37 trillion of built assets. And if you look at the commercial real estate sector, there is very low understanding of the risk on cybersecurity, especially on the building operation system. So building cybersecurity was started to really take a look at the standards that were out there. We did not want to recreate anything, but take the standards and apply them very specifically for a vertical market space, being commercial real estate. How do you take the best, but also apply it in a very practical approach for a huge vulnerable marketplace, being commercial real estate? And the idea for building cybersecurity is, once what we call a profile is built for one industry segment, like commercial real estate, that can be replicated for other industry segments. So we looked at the standards that were out there. We have honed in on the OT side using a ISA standard called 62443, and then we're using the Center for Internet Security Control Domains version 8 for the IT side. So without further ado, let me introduce the team that we have in place. This group has been diligent in what we refer to as our breakfast club. A group of about 8 or 9 of us have been meeting 3 mornings a week for the better part of 2 years to go through and take these really technical standards and try to create an implementation guide that can be digestible and risk-based in various different bandings, so you can drive the appropriate level of cybersecurity for the appropriate risk for the appropriate type of building asset. So Fred, let me throw it over to you to introduce yourself, and then we'll move on from there.
Absolutely. Thank you, EJ. And thank you for Lucian for allowing me to be a part of this. This is really exciting. I am currently with Michael Baker, Director of OT Risk Assessment. And to EJ's point, finding a standard for a very immature world that we live in, the commercial real estate world, has been a journey of mine. And 2 years ago, I got involved with BCS because it wasn't a situation where we were going to just sit down and, pick something and go. EJ and Michael both and Jason can attest to the fact that we beat it up pretty hard to begin with. And that's how we came to 62443 and CIS, is because we wanted real requirements that fit in the commercial real estate world. And as such, we've worked diligently and we have a framework now. The other thing is my move to Michael Baker was because we want to try to help, not try to help, we are going to build the standard in at the beginning. And that does several things. One is it lowers the cost of implementing cybersecurity, because if you do it on the front end, you don't have to go back and retrofit. The other thing that it does is it helps the asset owner in their understanding of what it is that they're getting, because they get it very clearly as how the systems are designed, implemented, and installed. And then real quick, when we got finished with the framework, we knew that we couldn't just, say, okay, well, we're done. So we did a test drive, if you will, with a customer, not sure I can say, or with a company who's actually on the board of directors for BCS. And we found that we had some real good lessons learned, but even in the pressure test of the framework, the entity that had us do their building, they learned things. So it was a very good wealth of knowledge we gained from that activity. And we've got some other ones that we're working on now. And just the support across from like Jason and, the manufacturer side, the insurance side, Michael and I come from similar backgrounds, because what we wanted to do was be the voice of commercial real estate. So we also, one last thing is, we took that framework and we knew that in order to really socialize it out, we needed to come up with a way to knock off a lot of the techie. So we came up with a set of prerequisite questions. And these are really good, and we're going to have them on the BCS website that you need to ask yourself to see if you're ready. And these are very straightforward questions. There's 7 primary and then I think 10, secondary. And it will help the commercial real estate people to kind of get a temperature read of where they are. So that's it.
Jason Chrisman, let me throw it over to you. So Jason is with Johnson Controls, but has been a founding member, board member, and a real advocate behind this. So give us your sense of why you participated in BCS and the role it plays from a technology supplier and professional services vendor.
Thank you, EJ, and hello, everyone. So I lead product cybersecurity for my company. And of course, as a smart building technologies provider and integrator, we are embracing convergence, we're embracing connectivity, AI at the edge, cloud services. And obviously, with all that new value and the outcomes that those technologies can deliver, in light of the increasing cyber threats, we needed a model that BCS presents that tells us what the roadmap looks like for the right controls to build into the technologies when they're deployed for a specific risk case. So if it's an airport or a stadium or a hospital or a data center, there's different profiles of risk, meaning there are different sets of security controls that matter more. Because obviously in some instances, you might have life, safety, environmental impacts. In other instances, it might be a high productivity impact. And you need to tailor your security controls in a way that makes sense to the everyday facility manager, but also to the engineers who are designing the products and the end users who are operating and servicing that facility. So it truly is a shared partnership model. So for us, it really was about that roadmap and how do we better serve our customers to achieve those outcomes that they desire from their buildings.
Yeah, why don't you, Jason, also comment on when we look at this from a holistic approach, Debbie mentioned in the earlier session about people, right? So there's a whole people, process, and technologies, and the whole holistic view, especially from an ISA secure perspective of what you're driving to certify the technology as well.
Right. So holistically, right, 62443 is kind of at the embedded and control system layer. If you think about the basics of a technology stack, there's the devices, there's the thermostats, there's the chillers, the building management systems, the fire detection systems, and so forth. All those technologies can be built with good security controls in mind. But those security controls aren't necessarily found in some of the other standards or frameworks like ISO 27001 or CIS. You need something that's appropriate, which the IEC 62443 standard is appropriate for embedded control systems. However, right, in our world, things are converging. It is OT and IT. It is now cloud connected. It is now mobile connected. You need to build a fabric or an integrated view of risk, a holistic view of risk around the right 62443 controls, the right ISO controls, the right CIS controls, and package them in a way that the end customer, the facility owner operator can say, here's where I need to be able to operate at this risk level, this assurance level. Tell me I need to either be at the bronze, silver, gold, or platinum level of assurance in order to operate my facility to deliver those outcomes. And that's really what it's all about.
Thank you. Michael, give us a little background and how you play into this as well.
Sure. Thank you, EJ. Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. I'm with a firm called Newcomb & Boyd. We're consulting and engineers based out of Atlanta with a global reach. My initial focus in getting involved, I have a great IT background, over 20 years in IT, and I fell in love with operational technology once I was exposed to it. And I found that there was a lot of I've always been a widget guy and always been a thing, sensors and actuators and things. And the more I worked with it, the more I got exposed to the need to have cybersecurity introduced to this, because I recognized the more functional aspects that these devices provide, the greater the gap in security became. And so that became my focus. And it's one of the reasons why I enjoyed Newcomb & Boyd, is to stop risk from being introduced into the built environment or into any environment that we're designing for. So it's taking that security minded approach and applying it to your design. But also on the back end, there's, you have to see it all the way through. I always laugh when everybody says, oh, it's cybersecurity month. And I'm like, well, that's every month, right? That's like, it never ends. It's a continuous maturity level of growth that anyone with these types of technologies need to attend to. And so that's where BCS comes into play, is providing the framework of where to get started, because it's a heady thing to wrap your head around if you're not used to it. And then also, how do I grow my program so that I can attain these different levels and continue to make sure that I'm cyber secure?
Thank you. So Fred designs it, Jason puts the tech in. Talk, Michael, a little about the commissioning and, making sure that this is a continuous approach.
Yeah, for sure. That's one of the more critical components of the life cycle, right? So if Fred says, I need a widget to do a thing, Jason says, I have a product that can do it, and it can do it in this fashion. What commissioning really comes into play is it doing its thing, and is it doing it the way it was intended? So in other words, I'm going to buy a front door at my house, and I'm going to buy, design some locks on it. I'm coming in and making sure, did you actually lock it? Does the lock actually work? Was it installed correctly? So the intent is to be secure. The commissioning piece is ensuring that it actually is. And the reason that's really important is because as these systems are moving from a siloed install to a more integrated type approach and platform, there are going to be a lot more interactions that you have to keep track of. So when we talked about earlier, Michael's point about making sure that the network is segmented. Micro-segmentation is going to be the way things are going. It's very important to be able to do that, because the granular level of whom talks to whom is going to be a very important key piece to cybersecurity. And so at a commissioning level, you can gather a baseline of how that is currently functioning, so that if something does get tripped later on and you've got some weird wonky stuff going on, now you actually have the ability to go back and say, okay, this is where it deviated from my baseline, where these devices were compromised, and this is when it got introduced into the environment. That gives me a clue on what I need to do to try to mitigate that risk and recover from that if there is an event that occurs.
Excellent, thank you. So you talk about segmentation. ISA 62443 has this concept of zone and conduits, which is similar to segmentation on the IT side. Fred, why don't you give some color around what the team did to build reference models for the various different types of, built environments?
Yeah, so, but before we go there, I do want to add this in because it's foundational to that. And this is what sold me on 62443 is because we have to teach an understanding of why you do this, what you do, and that kind of thing. It very simply put, ISA lays it out pretty clean. Like Michael was talking about the different aspects. I mean, you kind of have all three of those right here. In ISA, you have the asset owner who comes up with a set of, this is what I want, and this is how it should be done. So you kind of help him learn that. And in the middle of that is the service provider who installs it, and then the manufacturer provides the product. Well, then there's a chain of what I call liability that goes back. And that's what Michael was talking about, is when the manufacturer provides it to the service provider needs to verify that it can do what the manufacturer says. And then the building or asset owner then gets that installed, but needs to know that it was installed correctly, right? So when we started down this path, and after we kind of settled on ISA, it was like, okay, well, we got to come up with a building with personas, I guess is a way to put it. And commercial real estate, there's over 100 billion square feet out there. And I looked at a graph the other day, and it said by 2029, the amount of money spent is going to be somewhere around $629 billion. That's a lot of things being connected, right? Well, so that's a big chunk of, I'm not saying that the others are not important, but that was kind of the low-hanging fruit that got us started. So we took a look at the commercial real estate space, created, we didn't degrade ISA 62443, but we made sure that it fit into the commercial real estate world. And eventually, very soon, we're going to start moving into other verticals, but foundationally, it's all going to be on 62443 and CIS.
And I know we only have 20 minutes or a couple minutes left. So Jason, what keeps you up at night?
Well, threats constantly. Look, I mean, it's a matter of keeping everyone at pace with where the threat is going, with where technology is going, where the market is driving things. And what I mean by that is we now have regulations coming out for software bill of materials. That's excellent, right? That's going to bring the nutrition label to our products that says, here's what's in it, and here's what needs to be patched and updated and maintained. You've got zero trust architectures, which we haven't seen before within this space of OT for buildings. That's bringing things like software-defined networking, passwordless, right? Things that we just haven't observed in this space before. Greater interoperability with SIM and SOC systems, so you can have that logging and monitoring across the micro-segmented, what used to be traditional isolated domains. In the far out future, you may have quantum threats, right? And so how do we build crypto agility into these kinds of products? Why? Because they're going to be there for 15 to 30 years. And you just can't have hardware sitting there that can't be, can't have a firmware or a software package uploaded to handle future threats. You got to have some kind of future-proof ability in that. So it's just the speed and pace at which everything is happening is what kind of keeps me up at night. But at the same time, it's a fun, exciting challenge to take on as an industry, as a supplier. And most important, you do this as a community. That's why BCS was formed, when you have suppliers, integrators, asset owners, government, everyone coming together to say, what is the right model to really make this happen? It's that community engagement that I thrive on.
Wow, thank you so much. Yeah, and thanks for all the support with Johnson Controls at BCS. So for more information, please go out to www.buildingcybersecurity.org. What we're trying to do as a team is, as Fred mentioned, we've stress tested the framework on a couple of what I'll say beta clients. In the next coming weeks, we'll be able to release what we see as the prerequisites to have organizations start thinking about how they align their data and their policies and procedures to start to think about being assessed under the framework. So without further ado, I'll throw it back to you, Lucian. Thanks for the time, and look forward to the last session, especially as we tie in the insurance piece.
Yeah, I want to get to that, but I actually have a question for the panelists that I think we need to, what is our dream? I think our dream is to build cyber safety into the very beginning of any type of product, right? I know, Fred, that's what you're devoting yourself. How far to the left in the requirement stage do we say a device or a building or a car needs to be cyber safe. I think that's what we're trying to get to. I would love to get the panelists' impressions on what the work we're doing, how far to the left we want to push it. I mean, I know, Jason, you would love to take the cyber safety of your products and bring it into the requirement state, so they have to be spec'd out. Just some final thoughts on that before we turn over to a cyber insurance discussion.
So real quick, I mean, you know, as everybody knows, cybersecurity is a journey. I want to push this as to the wall on the left. I don't want to stop. So, but I got to be real that it's a process, right? So that's what we're doing here is we're trying to push it as far to the left as possible. And the reason to me this is very important is because I love what NIST said in 8228, where it says, you know, OT interacts with the physical world. If people understand that, you know, a cyber incident in IT is bad. You know, I mean, there's some things that can happen there, but in our world, we work with the things that does things. So that's my perspective.
Michael.
Yeah, for sure. I think the key piece now is we're salting and sowing. We're trying to grow the idea. It's a concept that needs to be introduced. I think being able to break it down to a level of understanding is critical, so that way you can reach all of the stakeholders. Construction progress, it takes a village to build a project, right? And there's numerous people that you have to have a certain level of understanding. You don't have to understand the whole thing, but you need to be able to understand your role and that there are roles played by others. And I think that's really what the framework is really starting to provide here, is that level of understanding that cybersecurity is just going to be table stakes moving forward with any project, really with anything that's involving OT and IT together.
Yeah, my comment to that, Lucian, is if you look at the C-suite, they don't understand the cybersecurity risk as it relates to the built environment.
I
So
agree.
part
And it was something that
having
Michael Drainsfield picked up earlier in the first session about we need to look at it as a safety culture, as a human safety issue. And when you do that, it no longer becomes a competition for prioritization of funding. It becomes a must-have. When you start looking at human safety, it's like, okay, no matter what, we'll cut dollars here, but we have to preserve the cyber safety culture and cyber safety investments. So I just wanted to pick up what Michael had put out earlier as far as what we need in this country, looking at the OT threat, and how we address it in a way that truly can drive investments towards solutions.
well, that
All
will
right,
wrap.
I didn't mean to
Thank
drag
you.
you guys out a little longer. We'll move on. But I do want to say thank you, EJ, and my gosh, the work that Jason and Fred and Michael have done in support of building this for the nation, for the world is truly spectacular. So thank you, each of you, for your contributions and your time today.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, no worries. So I'm going to ask you guys to go off, and we're going to bring up by far the best of all the panelists, and that would be a discussion of cyber insurance, which is absolutely critical for us moving forward. Because every CISO knows and every CIO knows that they can jump up and down, but if they don't have an opportunity to offer return on investment to the C-suite, you know, that they ultimately will always continue to struggle to get resources. And that's why we've asked Joanne and Shay, and I'll introduce them in a minute, to come on and talk about risk management and ultimately, you know, what can we do to incentivize investments, particularly as we look at risk management across the spectrum. So I'm hoping I see Shay and there's Joanne. So first I'd like to go ahead and do a brief introduction, and the same thing, I'd like to ask each of the panelists to expound a little bit upon their backgrounds. So first of all, Joanne Quintal is the Managing Director and Property and B&I Leader for Cyber Solutions at Aon. For those of you who don't know what Aon is, it's one of the world's leading multinational financial services firm, specializing in a range of risk mitigation products. I mean, most importantly, Joanne's calling in from my hometown, which is Philadelphia. So it's great to have you join. All right. And then also on our panel is Shay. Shay Leach is the counsel in the firm of Squire Patton Boggs. A big shout out to Squire Patton Boggs. They have been providing pro bono services to our nonprofit now for over a year. So thank you, Shay, for that. And she specializes as a counsel in proactive privacy and cybersecurity compliance. So what I'd like to do, Joanne, if it's possible, well, I'd like you to open up and with maybe some opening comments. The three of us have talked. We have a long list of questions to get to. So we'll, just some opening comments for both you and Shay, and then we'll get started.
Great. Thank you, Lucian. It's a pleasure to be here. By way of background, I think there's been a common theme throughout all of us on these presentations today with where we've all started and how we ended up in cyber or related to cyber. And I have been in the insurance brokerage community for 30 plus years, with a large portion of that in the property side. So you look at the assets that all of your firms own and the business interruption loss associated with a fire. And 3 years ago, I jumped out of that and moved into the cyber world, specifically to try and find solutions around gaps in cover that were being developed under different insurance products, starting with the property and exclusions that are introduced there. And working with the marketplace, the cyber insurance marketplace is in an infancy stage compared to traditional property and casualty. So there's a large education needed to the community to be able to bring solutions to all of you on the buying side. And with that, I'll pass it over to Shay.
Yeah, Shay, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for the opportunity. As Lucian mentioned, my name is Shay Leach. I am of counsel in Squire Patton Boggs' DC office. My practice specializes in proactive privacy and cybersecurity compliance. So I help organizations to assess their data protection obligations and to determine how they protect their data, their assets, their property from both a privacy and a security perspective. I've been practicing in this field for about a decade now. And basically my whole career has been focused in this area. I do a little bit of incident response work as well. So sometimes I see the reactive side of the practice, and that very much informs what we do on the cybersecurity side.
Yeah. Okay, that's awesome. And look, we had a long discussion the other day, and we've got a series of questions. I'd like to get to those, but really the questions are for both of you. But I'd like to direct the first one to Joanne just real quick. And how would you describe today's cyber insurance market? I know we've had some volatility and then a little softening. Can you give us a little background on what you're seeing right now in current trends?
Absolutely. And it's a great question, because I'm sure a number of those on the phone that have lived through a cyber renewal in the last 12 months, it was very painful. Candidly, when you looked at what was happening on the ransomware side of things, and if you went back 13 quarters through last year, you had a 252% increase uptick in ransomware. And a lot of that brought the insurance companies to the realization of, we need better information from an underwriting perspective. We need to understand the IT. That's always been the focus when you looked at privacy and retail, common trends for cyber breaches. Fast forward to what we started to see the uptick around ransomware and OT. And a lot of what you've heard in the prior couple of sessions here is very focused on the OT. And that was the most vulnerable from the insurance company's perspective, because they were paying claims they had not anticipated or thought about. Again, tying back into that infancy from an underwriting standpoint of maybe not knowing what they should be looking for. So we were seeing, if you look month to month and where we were, say, in January of 22, rate increases were off the charts to 160%. Fast forward to the third quarter of this year, and we're now seeing in that range more of a 20-30% increase. So there's stabilization, and that stabilization is a direct result of the improvements on the cybersecurity controls taken on by all of you. And the challenge some people had was candidly the inability to get insurance, because if you didn't have effective controls in place, you were losing the opportunity to have the coverage or imposing serious restrictions around what was referred to as co-insurance. So the insured would take a percentage of the loss alongside the insurance company. So it was not an effective risk transfer to protect your balance sheet. It was a sharing of that exposure. We can look at capacity. There were a number of markets that started reducing their capacity. Standard limits of 10 million became 5 million. The good thing now, when we look at the market compared to a year ago, is there's new entrants in the marketplace. There's additional capacity. There's markets that now want to come to the table, understanding, again, the risks associated with cyber, in most cases, have improved from where it was a year ago.
Yeah, and I think that's it's going to be a continuing evolving trend. One thing I've heard for the cyber insurance underwriters, there's just not a lot of data out there. So as we grow our body of knowledge of what is in the realm of the possible, we can get much more defined on what are needed for response instruments. Shay, from your perspective, what are your clients experiencing with respect to getting cyber insurance or renewing it, and some of the general trends you're seeing?
So, as you might expect, many of our clients are living through the process that Joanne kind of explained a moment ago. So definitely that we're seeing a lot more vetting from the insurance company of those security controls, not only from an IT perspective, but also becoming aware of the operational technology of those insured clients and asking about those kinds of things. There are certain controls that have become basic table stakes, and if you don't have them, you're going to have a very difficult time getting insurance. Like any system that has remote access, you're going to have MFA on it. Sounds pretty basic to anybody in the cybersecurity world, but it presents challenges in a lot of cases for some of these legacy OT systems that perhaps your operations guys can log into from home, but maybe don't support the capability of MFA. And so we've seen a lot of our clients scrambling to try to figure out solutions to those types of problems. And also they are experiencing the sticker shock of the increased retentions, premiums, things like that. And in many cases, they're potentially building an insurance tower so that they can get to the desired limits that they would like in the event of a security incident. And so it's been a real challenge, but it's been pushing a lot of organizations to, from the top down, really commission those security assessments, for example, that have more traditionally been viewed as an IT function. But this is also being driven by various regulatory actions. Like we could talk about the SEC's proposed rules that are going to place obligations for attestation on boards of directors, be requiring disclosures about expertise and various security controls in your periodic reports, and then in real time in the event of a security incident. And so all of these factors have contributed to more and more company leadership taking this on as a concern, as opposed to leaving it for IT, having the CISO come and brief the board of directors periodically, and the board of directors letting all of the information go above their heads because they're not cyber guys and saying, sounds good to us. That's not really the approach anymore. And so it's really, I see more organizations, and I think at this point it's the more proactive ones, but also could be the ones that are just up for insurance renewal, where their leadership is really driving the security. So we're seeing a little bit more of that culture for cybersecurity that was mentioned in one of the prior panels.
Yeah, there's so much that you just mentioned. I love to follow up, but Joanne, I think that there's something there. As you know, with risk, there's three things you do with it. You either assume it, you transfer it, or you mitigate it. And in the OT world, and I know this is relatively new for a lot of underwriters, what trends are you seeing relative to the cyber market's approach to OT risk, particularly as it pertains potentially to human safety and property casualty? There's something you can provide some background on what you're seeing changing as far as addressing that physical security risk?
Absolutely. And I think it all ties back into collaboration is a word you heard from Shay. It's a word we heard through the earlier panel as well. And when you look at the CISO, your IT team, your IT security team, all of those people are usually well collaborative. When you go outside of that, that collaboration is key with risk management. It's key with finance. It's not uncommon to be at a board level. And a lot of that is driven by the fact that the board wants to know, where are we vulnerable? Because the direct impact on insurance costs or the associated insurance retention or the limits they feel they need based on the known vulnerabilities. or the limits they want based on the unknown vulnerabilities. There's a definite sophistication developing across the industry, and that is both at the individual insured level, at the insurance company level. And if you take a look at how that's all tied together, it's very specific around set controls. And you look at the segmentation between OT and IT, the criticality of understanding that, and the impact of it not being segmented was also discussed on an earlier panel. When you look at things like email filtering, you look at the training that you do for phishing, ties back into Deborah's comment earlier about people. People leave us the most vulnerable. There are many aspects of cybersecurity, and there's, currently there's a list of 12 of them. I don't think we have to go down all 12 of them. MFA was mentioned, EDR was mentioned, the phishing exercises, patch management, incident response planning. Insurance companies are looking to each of you to say, hey, are you ready for it? What is the plan in place? And some of this sounds so simplistic, but so many clients are caught off guard at the time of breach and that, oh shit moment, excuse the language, but what do I do and who do I call first? And where do I get that information now? My systems are locked out. Does everybody have a cheat sheet of phone numbers on paper sitting next to them? Again, things that we've moved away from in the world of the internet technology, et cetera. So very basic things like that will direct a market's view of the risk. And the piece, when you look at the OT specifically, there's so many applications that I'm sure a number of you have been involved in. That collaboration to get your individual information to the insurance company is key. Filling out an application for basic cybersecurity, we've seen the introduction of ransomware supplementals. We've seen the introduction of operational technology supplementals, and the key focus and concerns around those controls and how they're all tied together, whether it's privilege access users, what are you doing with passcodes, who has the access, how are you managing your inventory of assets. There's very specific things around operational technology that are key from an underwriting perspective to get you that most competitive price and the broadest limit available.
Yeah, anything, Shay, to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just, I'd say the biggest challenge when it comes to our clients is making sure that all of the right stakeholders are in the room and speaking to each other. It's really a matter of collaboration throughout the organization, and it's really one of these things where we'll go into a client, for example, and they will be asking us to do a cybersecurity assessment. And perhaps this time it's being commissioned, whereas in the past, commissioned by the board of directors or legal or something like that, whereas in the past it was commissioned by IT. What we'll see in those circumstances is the breadth of the assessment grows substantially from what IT is sometimes looking at, because they get rather focused on the systems that they are responsible for managing, and perhaps their OT, for example, is managed by the operations department as opposed to IT. But when we come in and are asked to scope an assessment, we'll say, okay, this is great. We want all of these pieces that you have here under your prior assessment, but we need your operations, we need legal, we need HR, because these are all of the areas where you're either storing your valuable data or where a ransomware incident would totally cripple all of your operations and bring you to a screeching halt. And this really kind of often opens the eyes of the IT folks to a broader scope of the risk that's faced by their organization, and generates that conversation that we've all been discussing during this panel of how you mitigate that risk. And it's a layered approach. It can be both contractual and involve insurance, but then it's also going to involve these security controls that are going to be asked about in your insurance renewal. And so it really becomes a broader view when you get different people looking at the environment.
Yeah. Hey, I go ahead. I'm sorry, Joanne.
Well, I was just going to follow up on Shay had a critical point there. And when we look at cyber insurance, everybody's always focused on the renewal. When you take a look at the evolution of what's happening across each of your individual organizations and what you've heard today, cyber is something that changes every day. And those touch points for insurance can't be focused for 2 months around a renewal. It has to be collaborative with your insurance company. It has to be collaborative with your team. But the more engaged you all are, the smoother process it will be.
Yep, that's music to my ears, because that's exactly what we're seeing, is that the cyber threat constantly evolves. You've got to come up with an organization that's staying on top of that, and then it can let everybody know, here's where you need to be today, and it's not where you were yesterday. So very much appreciate that. So bear with me, we had to throw out a little bit of a curveball here. So in my background, as you know, anybody who buys a house gets an opportunity, to acquire property and casualty insurance. And there's always a question on as you're applying for that insurance policy, hey, do you have a physical security system in your home? And for me, I've always looked at my dog and say, check yes, I've got a physical security system. And then they never used to really check, you know what I mean? That you would just get it and you get your $100 off on your insurance policy and you're good to go, right? So now we're starting to see, a lot more diligence, even in a full range of insurance premiums, to the point where Travelers Insurance, I believe it was, recently denied a claim because their client had filled out the questionnaire saying, yeah, we do multi-factor authentication across all the board. They got hit with an attack. Turns out they didn't have it, and then denied the claim. So I guess moving forward, Joanne, this question mainly for you, but Shay also, I mean, do you see insurers being really more diligent on saying, okay, you told us this was what you're doing, you didn't do it, or should insurers be asking more from their clients as far as continuous validation and monitoring of the things that they're asking for to be able to mitigate cyber risk? Just want to throw it out there for any open comments.
It's a great question, and every insured should always be honest and truthful when they're filling out their applications. There's things in applications that are information only. There are things in applications that are tied to warranty statements. That gives the insurance company the ability to limit or exclude or otherwise, depending on the individual warranty statement. I think it's on the individual broker's responsibility to work with an insured to explain those nuances and to understand those differences, because a warranty statement does just that. It gives the wiggle room, or the out, if you will, potentially for the carrier, depending on what the warranty statement says. So I think there's the due diligence across misrepresentation for anybody. Nobody wants to misrepresent anything. Things do change. The intent of the application is a picture at the time they're assessing the risk. There are clauses within the insurance policy that will tie to increase in hazards or misrepresentations, et cetera. So we could spend a full day, if not 12, on just the nuances of a contract. And I'm sure, Shay, on your legal side, you'll even have some further commentary here. It's a great question, but I would just say due diligence is important as you're negotiating with what you're going to be prospectively securing to ensure that you're not tied to that kind of situation.
These are excellent points, Joanne, and sometimes the insurance renewal process will be the thing that pushes the organization to do a more thorough assessment, because they don't know specifically if they can make the representations that are called for. And obviously, if they make a misrepresentation, it could be cause for exclusion of a claim. And so I've definitely received the call from the client that says, oh my goodness, we just got this insurance application. They want us to attest that we're doing all of these things. I don't know that we can claim this. Let's do an assessment to make sure, of what we are doing, and to put a roadmap in place of what we will be doing in the near future, so that we can push that application process through, because otherwise, they stand the risk of making a misrepresentation in their application and then being in a really bad spot in the event of a security incident. And so this has been a really big push with a lot of organizations. There's also a little bit of, I've had a lot of clients also ask about whether they can allocate the risk differently in their agreements because of these kinds of things. we get a greater indemnity from our vendors, or do we exclude security incidents from limitations of liability where your vendor is actually going to be the one that's maintaining? Maybe they are deploying some of your operational technology for you, or maybe you have outsourced cloud IT assets. And so they're looking at all of these other ways to mitigate that risk in addition to the insurance that, that we've been discussing during this panel.
Yeah. So I just got a note from home for anybody on the call who might be from USAA. I do have an active security system operating at my home right now. I just want to make sure I pass it on to everybody. Don't want to be getting a call from them. So what can we offer the audience moving forward as we're looking at the cyber risk and emerging instruments? I do know that as renewals are getting tougher, deductibles are going up, premiums are going up, exclusions are expanding. What can we offer our audience as far as what to look for? And more importantly, is it ultimately there may be a decision: do we continue to transfer risk or do we mitigate risk? We'd love to get your opinions on where you think that's headed and how the insurance industry will reward those who mitigate risk in some way, or is that, or is there more a desire to expand risk transfer mechanisms? So moving forward, what do you suggest, Joanne, or what can you offer for those on the call to get a better understanding of that risk?
Good question. And I think when we look at any of these and you're rolling into the opportunity for insurance, do you maintain it? Do you take some of the savings rather than the increased expense and put it into greater controls? That's a common question over the last hard market cycle. What's happening with the softening market now is you're going to be in a better position to have budgeted for your insurance costs. You likely have improved your security controls, those that were impacting any coverage grants that you had. Hopefully you weren't left with some ransomware or some sublimits around ransomware. If you were, you've taken the steps to improve those needed controls. So you're going to be in a better position to canvass the market. The fact that we have new capacity, meaning new insurance companies that are willing to write cyber insurance, will also help drive competition. The key as you start the process, like anything else, is you want to start early and you want to be collaborative internally. So when you're looking at that list of underwriting questions, the applications from the insurance companies, or on the larger risks, those that do underwriting presentations to the breadth of the global marketplace, what key points do you need to include in that presentation? Have you worked with somebody on the vendor side to assess where you rate within them? One of the things the carriers are doing too, they're doing their own vulnerability scanning. They're non-invasive, but they're looking for individual information that they can come back and challenge things that you may say have been done, and they may find gaps in that. So you want to be prepared for that. Candidly, when you get those assessments from the insurance company, you're entitled to the time to take and walk back through it. If there's open ports for maybe something you've divested that is no longer yours, there are situations that the insurance companies can make you feel penalized, but lots of times come to the table and have a conversation. And that conversation, again, should be armed with the information from the CISO, the IS team, as well as risk management, as well as legal. To Shay's point, when you look at the contractual impact of things that you might have signed, you want to make sure that your insurance is going to cover that. I think when you look at from a board level down, there's very few boards today that want to limit or exclude the purchasing of cyber, even at an expensive cost, because there's an obligation now, and the exposure to them as a director, if you don't buy it, is also changing. I think that's probably the best advice I could give, is a collaboration and start early, and don't be afraid to ask questions and work with your broker before you put it in front of the insurance company, so you can be anticipating the next questions that will come to make sure you're put in the best light you can, given the current portfolio of your cyber hygiene.
Yeah, Shay, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the trends that I think is really going to be continue moving forward is that traditionally, in my practice at least, you've had these kind of two groups of potential clients. You've had the clients that are personal information heavy. Maybe they're in regulated industries, or maybe not, but they just collect a lot of information, and they felt like for years now, they felt like they were obligated, or they may actually be obligated under regulation to implement a certain security framework, standards under a regulation, you know, like DFS, the New York DFS rules have particular requirements. But now what we're seeing, and to tie it in with the OT piece, is that even organizations that aren't really personal information heavy are really taking a harder look at their IT infrastructure. They're realizing that they might not process a lot of consumer personal information, but they do have their employees, they do have all of their operations, which they need to keep up and running. And so more and more of those organizations are understanding the need to become more sophisticated.
Yep.
And I think that that's going to continue in the near future, as those organizations try to harden themselves. I think the spate of ransomware that everybody has been speaking about it was a real wake-up call to a lot of those organizations, because you'd see headlines that this like aluminum manufacturer says that they lost $40 million in the first week of their security incident. Well, in prior years, a lot of those types of entities wouldn't have viewed themselves as a big target, because they would have said, we don't have a lot of data that's interesting to steal. Well, perhaps that's not what they're looking for. They're just looking for a big payday. And so that's becoming, it's becoming more and more common that those entities are really stepping up their game with respect to cybersecurity. And I really see that in continuing into the near future.
Yeah, you know, in my experience, I've been talking to a lot of CISOs and CIOs over, you know, as the CEO of Building Cybersecurity, and I can't tell you how many CIOs and CISOs don't account for OT threats in their portfolios and their inventories. Don't account for, and it's not just data, but maybe employee safety or manufacturing processes, you know, are potentially threatened, and there's still an awareness that has to grow, and they have to start looking at it collectively, bringing the entire team in, not just the IT team, but the OT team in, and making sure they can provide to the C-suite as they're looking at insurance mechanisms, the totality of the potential threat that you want to go ahead and try to either transfer or mitigate. One thing, Shay, you picked up on, and I want to expound and offer Joanna an opportunity too, is the Security and Exchange Commission. Can you provide the audience just a quick review, and I can help you there, of what the SEC has proposed for rules as far as publicly traded companies and what they have to report on as far as cyber programs?
Yeah, so it was the early summer or late spring, I believe, that the Securities Exchange Commission proposed a new rule that would apply to publicly traded organizations, where they, assuming the rules are adopted in substantially the same format, they will require a lot greater transparency with respect to cybersecurity. So among the things that will need to be reported in your periodic public reports, either quarterly or annual, probably both, would be, for example, your certain information regarding your security controls, policies, and procedures that are in place at the organization. Now, this doesn't have to be granular, of course. You don't want to give the roadmap to your security out in a public filing, but you have to provide, you're going to have to provide some of that information. Also, information regarding board of directors, cybersecurity expertise, and whether you offer training and things like that to employees. And so in addition to that, they're going to expect real-time reporting of cybersecurity incidents. And by real time, I mean, the rule says within 4 days.
No, it's 96 hours. That's got the industry really upset that they have to report within 96 hours.
Yeah, so 4 days of determining that you have a material cybersecurity incident, where materiality is going to be basically construed in the same way as any other issue for like securities law. So that's going to be whether an investor would feel that the information about the security incident in this circumstance would be important to their decision to make an investment. And so this, as you were saying, has really shaken up businesses because, for example, everybody freaked out when GDPR went into effect and there was the 72-hour reporting deadline for European regulators. But the thing about that is that it's not public when you report to the CNIL that you've had a security incident, and it may only become public if they decide to make it so down the line after you've finished investigating the incident. Well, if you're reporting within 4 days a material cybersecurity incident, you may be making that disclosure when you don't have perfect information about the incident. You haven't completed your investigation. Now, from my perspective, I would argue that you need to make that disclosure within 4 days of determining materiality. So that might give you a little bit of wiggle room. You don't have to, necessarily report within 4 days of getting the alert on your EDR that you've got some kind of activity going on. But once you determine that it's material, you're going to have to report, and that report's going to be made public. And so this is one of the other things that we're seeing driving additional attention from leadership, that plus the FTC's recent activities, not only fining organizations, but bringing in executives and making them personally liable so that in the event that they move, that consent decree will stay with them for 20 years. So it's really caused a lot of company leadership and boards of directors to pay attention to cybersecurity even more.
Yeah, Joanne, anything to add to that?
I think it's well covered there, Shay.
Yeah, I think she did a great job. So I think one of the things that, and we only have a couple minutes left. I'm gonna want to offer up final thoughts for each of you. But I think one of the things that within BCS, our nonprofit, we're trying to answer is what is reasonable. As you know, the CEO for Colonial is involved with a series of lawsuits because supposedly Colonial didn't do enough reasonable cybersecurity protections to create a disruption of business or prevent a disruption of business. I think that's a term that still needs to be defined. As you know, that's why BCS was created, to have an industry standard. It's like, hey, this is reasonable based on your risk, but that's still out there. And I think that we as a nation need to answer that question. What is it reasonable when it comes to cybersecurity, either the mitigation or the transfer? So Joanne, I'm thrilled to have you on. I would love just to offer you the opportunity for final thoughts for the audience before we close it out.
Thank you. I would just encourage all of you to stay close to the risk management team and to your CISO/IS and OT. The criticality of having all of those components ready at a renewal will help. Sorry. The right decision just popped up. Sorry, it disrupted me. No, and I would just say that the good news is the market is coming along. It's hopefully will be a less painful renewal, but the more you're able to share, even including from a budgetary standpoint, keep in mind what you don't have done today and is going to be implemented. Share that information with your insurance companies as well, because it will only enable you to have a broader breadth of cover and hopefully a better pricing.
All right, and Shay, over to you.
So I guess my takeaway would be that this is kind of a theme that's been throughout my remarks, but cybersecurity really does need to be a team sport. You have to involve IT, operations, legal, HR, everybody throughout the organization, and your leadership has to make it a priority so that you push it throughout the organization. That will put you in a really good position when you come up for your insurance renewal to answer those questions. So long as you're doing periodic assessments and creating your current state and your roadmap of where your future state needs to be, and you're able to chart that progress, you'll have that good story to tell when you need to present that information to an insurer for the renewal process, or even, for example, customers when they come to ask you about your cybersecurity or data protection posture in the future. But it really does need to be a team sport.
Yep. So I appreciate those as the last words. And I think collaboratively as an industry, we need to look at this and how can we mitigate risk? and ultimately as a team, and then ultimately make better determinations on the risk that we need to transfer. Thank you both, Joanne and Shay. A great discussion. I thought it was outstanding. Hint, hint. If you're looking at their survey, but I just want to say thank you to Lucian Fagaris in the IIoT world for allowing us to bring up the rear guard and close this out. It's been an incredible 2 days, and I'm just thrilled the way things have gone. So I appreciate, again, Joanne and Shay. If anybody wants to contact them, there's some information in the chat about how to get a hold of us, and then we'll make those connections. But thank you for your time this afternoon. Lucian Fagaris, we're going to turn it back over to you to close it out. But thank you for the opportunity this afternoon, and thank you to the audience for bearing with us for the last 90 minutes.
Yes, thank you. I echo that. Thank you, Joanne, and Lucian for this incredible session. So not only that there was an incredible couple of days where you found hopefully ways to extract value from your manufacturing and logistics operations, but also how to do it in a secure manner, or at least mitigate some of the risk. With that, stay tuned for several events in the IoT World Days in the upcoming year. I will end here and with one note, letting you know that the recording will be available within the next 5 days. So if you're in the audience, or if you have stepped away, you'll get an email with the recordings. With this concludes the program for today. Thank you.